In the early days of South Dakota, in the 1800s, as state institutions were being given permanent homes, the state penitentiary was built in Sioux Falls. It's an impressive building of natural granite, proudly erected on the bluffs overlooking the city from the north. Times changed, the city grew. Progress altered the Sioux Falls skyline through the years. But inside this place of confinement, the loneliness, loss of freedom, and pain of separation from family are the same as those experienced by the first inmates at the South Dakota State Penitentiary. How could men who pass through here feel that it's great to be alive? Hello, I'm Dean Randall, speaking to you for River Park of South Dakota. As a service to your community, River Park has explored the lives of people in trouble with the law and who are now paying for their crimes behind bars. People of prison. Glenn Jorgensen, River Park president, recently toured the South Dakota State Penitentiary facilities looking for the reason for our growing prison population. The question was simple: why are the prisons becoming overcrowded? The answers were more complex. Glenn spoke with the warden and rehabilitation experts and with the people themselves, people of prison. Some interesting facts and possible solutions to the problem were brought out, as Glenn met many prisoners, each with a compelling story to tell. You might be wondering if this program is a departure from the traditional theme of alcoholism in the It's Great to Be Alive series. You'll soon see the correlation between prisons and chemical dependency as Glenn talks with Herman Solon, warden at the South Dakota State Penitentiary.
Herman, what's the South Dakota State Penitentiary designed for number-wise? How many people are you supposed to have here?
Well, inside the walls we have a design capacity of 440. That's one man to a cell. Our count today is 788. We have about 540 men inside the walls, and we have about 247, 48 outside the walls.
So that's an overcrowded situation.
Well, in some ways, it's an overcrowded situation, and the fact that we have nearly 100 cells doubled up, which is not really desirable. We don't really worry about it from the legal ramifications, but this is an old institution, so we are placing an overload on our plumbing and electrical systems and some of our ancillary support systems, which is something of a concern because we don't know how long they can sustain that kind of an overload. But by and large, we've broadened our programming to take care of many aspects of this, and our outside programming as well. So we're coping.
Well, you're doing, in visiting around and being through it, obviously you've got it under good control and it's operating well. But I'm wondering, of those rather large numbers of people, can you tell me what percentage or what number of those you believe are incarcerated as a result of some involvement with the misuse or the use of alcohol or other drugs?
Well, we run through, in the last 2 or 3 years, we run about 11 to 1,200 men through the system, coming, going, and staying all the time. The information we get as far as alcohol and drugs and the admission records is from the individual himself. So consequently, as far as statisticians are concerned, some of those figures might be suspect. But nevertheless, our records would indicate that somewhere between 55 and 90% of the men coming in here have come in with alcohol or drugs being a contributing factor, one of many contributing factors to their criminal record.
Warden Solon just gave you the clue. He said that between 55 and 90% of the prisoners gave alcohol or drug abuse as a contributing factor to imprisonment. Now, that's a startling figure, one that certainly demands attention. Let's return to the conversation.
A really tough question. What can we do about it to reduce the numbers of people who end up in the system?
Well, of course, personally, we can talk about prison reform, and I think the important thing is that we have to remember that the men and women who are incarcerated are products of our society. I would like to believe that the simple way to do it would either to be reform society, which obviously no one wants to attack, but in my judgment, a revitalization of the institutions which historically have been responsible for attitudes and values and deportment of our young people. And I'm talking about the family, the schools, and the churches. Certainly would be, in my judgment, the way to start. If we have to start spending our money when these kids are 3 and 4 and 5 years old, the time to get them is then, not after they're in the system. That may be wishful thinking, because we have so many people in the system right now that we can no longer ignore. And in my judgment, incarceration is probably the most expensive and least effective way of addressing at least the alcoholism program. There has to be a better way. Now, don't ask me what the better way is, but they do saturate the system. For example, the DWIs. We run them through an alcohol awareness program or a pot program, which addresses alcoholism, among other things. And then we whistle them right out of here down to our trustee unit in Yankton, because they clutter up the place. And most of the people in at least the DWI category don't fit the pattern of a convicted felon. Oftentimes they're relatively successful people who've been successful on the street. In most cases, they're men in their 40s, 50s, 60s, even 70s. And they present unique problems to us in a prison setting, which is the primary reason we want them out of here.
I think that's an important point too, Herman, that I think society is aware of who ends up in the penitentiary, but where do the people come from? I mean, they're all levels of society. You have professional people. What are some of the types of people that make up the prison population?
As I say, they're products of society, typical microcosm of our demographics in the state. Presently, they range from age 17 to 74. We've got smart ones and dumb ones. We've got skinny ones and fat ones, the whole gamut. When we analyze our population, of course, presently about 20% of our population are American tribal inmates. They're a dominant minority here. And as I always say, currently we have that dominant minority. We have 19 blacks in here today, which is an all-time high for blacks in South Dakota. We have 6 Chicanos, and we have a pot full of Norwegians. Once you take your dominant minority away from a prison population, then the demographics are virtually identical to the geography in which they're located. About 82% of our men come from South Dakota, which is one of the pluses here. There's something less than the most sophisticated hardcore criminals in the world, which really simplifies the job of administering an institution like this. They just, the kind of street smarts and the kind of background they have, while it doesn't make prison appealing, it makes it a little easier, because about 95% of these guys just want to get out of here as soon as possible and go on with living their life.
Pat Herman is the director of the Chemical Dependency Awareness Program at the penitentiary. Glenn speaks with her next, and she agrees that the majority of inmates are serving time because of chemical abuse.
You give them awareness, and I know that you encourage them to
Yes.
continue with that when they get out of here. I also know that sometimes it becomes the indicated next step is perhaps intensive inpatient treatment after they were to leave here. Well, Pat, the important thing, and I know you're limited, and the penitentiary isn't intended to be a treatment center, but you are addressing the awareness that the problem exists is definitely here among administration, and there is a response coming from here to try to give these people an opportunity to deal with that.
Yeah, well, we've had some beautiful things happen. I know we had a young man about 32 that came in, and they suggested he go through the program, and he was very, very belligerent about it. And I'm not an alcoholic, the denial system again. And after he went through the class, he had an awareness. He said, yes, I think I was beginning to be in the initial stages. If I had progressed, he said, I think I would have, probably lost my family. And that was a big awareness for him.
Makes it worthwhile when it
does.
happens, and then the chances of that individual staying out of the penitentiary are enhanced, because so often the reason they come back is that they get out and they don't have the support system, or they don't have a program, they don't use the program, they begin drinking, they commit some more crimes, they're back in, and then you see them again. Of course, that happens in general society too, where people have relapses. So I'm glad you got a program going, and I wish you well in it. And
Well,
I
I
thank you.
think we have a pretty good one. The men we seem to have some credibility with the men, and that's what counts.
Good. Thank you, Pat.
You bet.
River Park realizes that people of all ages and walks of life become alcoholics or addicts to other drugs. Chemical dependency covers every economic and social sector. However, our research has shown that of South Dakota inmates, 70% are school dropouts, 80% come from broken homes, and only 10% have a marketable job skill. George's background is typical of those figures.
George, what have you done job-wise?
Well, I've been a house parent for a Lakota Village group home in Richard Table. I've been an ambulance driver at the Pine Ridge Public Health Service. I've been a cement finisher in Gillette, Wyoming. I worked as a bus boy one time down in Colorado Springs. I worked for a rancher in the Pine Ridge area. I really can't say I have very, very good jobs.
Stable, yeah. What about education? What was your education?
I got an 8th grade graduation, and during my convalescence in a VA hospital after I'd come back from service, I'd got a GED there.
And then Glenn spoke with Jerry Helm, who faced life imprisonment rather than admit to his alcoholism and treat his disease seriously.
I'm speaking with Jerry Helm, who is an inmate in the South Dakota State Penitentiary. He is in here on his 7th felony conviction. He, until very recently, was facing life in the state penitentiary, and he has a very remarkable story that we want to spend some time examining to see what we can learn from what happened in his life. Jerry, what are you in here for on this current charge?
I'm in here for writing a no-account check for $100, and I'm charged with, along with that, as being a habitual criminal.
I'd like to expand on the habitual criminal part for a moment, because any intelligent person hearing that you're in the penitentiary and we're facing life for issuing a no-account $100 check would have to say, ye gads. So there's got to be more to it than that. And we should also clarify that the life in prison now has been eliminated, that the United States Supreme Court overruled that, and your sentence has now been reduced to what?
20 years.
To 20 years. Okay. Why did you get life in the first place before the Supreme Court decision? Or what was your background? How much time have you spent in the penitentiary, and what was your history before the $100 check?
I've spent most of my adult life in the penitentiary since 1962, and all my offenses were burglaries at liquor stores, bars, writing bad checks, all alcohol related.
6 other prior convictions.
All under the influence of alcohol. Then I wrote this check for $100, and I was arrested for that, and charged as a habitual criminal. Charged me as a habitual criminal is because I had 3 or more prior felonies in a within 15 years.
Okay, in 15 years, or you spent 16 years you've been in the prison system now?
Yeah, I've been locked
Okay.
up for 16.
And in each of the cases, alcohol was involved in the commitment of the crime that you did. Are you an alcoholic?
Yes.
What about your parents and before you? Was there any history of alcohol problems in your family?
My father was an alcoholic. He's the one that taught me how to drink, you know. And I never got along that good with him, nor to get along with him. I had a few drinks with him, but my childhood was very stormy. I come from a broken home, see. And that's what scares me. I think you'll find a large percent of your inmates come from a broken home or a stormy marriage, and they run into situations as a child they didn't know how to handle. It seems like an inmate during his life, before he ever comes to the institution, is running from one thing or another at all times, and eventually ends up hiding in the bottle, and the bottle takes over. And it's not just the inmates in the institution, there's people out there the same way. So they make their own prison out there. It might not have bars, but they're in a prison regardless. You make your own prison.
Jerry, we have a situation where the penitentiary is overcrowded. There's a lot of concern and interest in how we're going to deal with the numbers of people. The extent of the alcohol and drug-related problem and the numbers of people that are here because of that, we hear statistics like 80% of the people here are here because of alcohol drug-related problems. From the inside, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly.
So you're illustrating what we know so well, Jerry, that within the illness of alcoholism, there is a tendency to deny or minimize the extent of the problem and frequently an unwillingness to deal with the reality of what's happening. Would you agree with that being true in your case? And of course, I think we should make it clear that we both agree, and we've talked about this, that society does have the responsibility and the right to expect that people who commit crimes, even though the alcohol is involved, they should be, it's not unreasonable that they pay the consequences of those actions, number one. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I believe that you're responsible for your actions regardless if you're under the influence of alcohol or not.
Jerry Helm is a perfect example of how alcoholism is crowding our prisons. We'd like to spend more time with him, but want you to meet Dave Trigg, who is an exception to the statistics we spoke of earlier. Dave was a successful attorney with an established law practice. He's now working in the prison kitchen.
Dave, what are you doing in the South Dakota State Penitentiary? What are you here for? What was your conviction?
I was convicted of 2 counts of conspiracy to distribute cocaine.
I suppose the logical first question would be, what's a nice, young, well-educated, professional man like you doing in a place like this?
I don't know. My story probably isn't that different from most people that go through this, except that it draws attention because of the fact that I did go to law school and I did practice law for a number of years. And since 1969, I've been a practicing attorney. The profession I chose lends itself nicely to some heavy drinking. Many attorneys drink heavily, and I fit in quite well in that. I'm not saying that they all do, but it's a definite problem in the profession. And I drank pretty steady for a total of 30 years. I was 44, 45 years old, and I graduated into the use of some of the other drugs. I guess that kind of, that fairly well brings me current.
Yeah,
It's one of the reasons I'm sure that I went into the speed drugs and cocaine and this type of thing is I reached that point that we talk about where one's resistance to the alcohol all of a sudden seems to be slipping. And I found that I couldn't drink as much and maintain myself as well as I had in previous years. On occasion, I would embarrass myself by catching myself slurring or staggering or spilling drinks, this type of thing. And I found that I could do a couple of lines of Coke, and I could drink all night and maintain myself. Not to say I was sober, but I at least wasn't calling attention to myself. And that's one of the real reasons why I did get into the drugs. Support my drinking habits.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody's ever heard that end of it before, but that's definitely part of my story.
Well, I think that would be surprising to people. I don't think they would understand that effect of it. Dave, you alluded to the education and your professional training. This was criminal activity. Now, you're an intelligent person. People out there are not going to be able to comprehend very well how you could do that and not know that you were doing something wrong.
I have real problems with that myself, Glenn. I really do. At my sentencing, I made reference in my statement to the court that had I been rational, I wouldn't have done this. my thinking definitely wasn't rational. I personally believe that I had reached that point in my addiction where nothing was rational anymore. I haven't had a drink now since I went to River Park in the latter part of January, and I feel pretty good about myself. This has been a good experience for me in spite of everything, because I do feel better about myself. My thinking is turning around now, and I am beginning to think rational, and I am beginning to realize what it is to be responsible for your actions. I've never been responsible for my actions or accepted the responsibility. Now I know what it's all about, I think, and I'm looking forward to the day that I can get out to my wife and my children and you know, contribute.
And start living.
Start living. Start thinking about tomorrow. I've never thought about tomorrow since I was in high school. I've been living day to day, week to week, you know, from one party to the next, never worrying about tomorrow particularly. And my finances and my present situation now attest to that.
Dave, what was the first trouble you ever got into with drinking? Did you get into any trouble early on?
Oh yes, I sure did. I have a juvenile record. Interestingly enough, my juvenile record involved shoplifting liquor from a liquor store and being caught with it up at one of the state A tournaments up at Huron when I was back in high school. I was constantly in trouble in high school, one party situation to the next. I was kicked out of Augustana, like I say, and that resulted from a drinking party in a men's dorm where they didn't approve of that sort of thing, especially then. My career in the military was singularly uneventful. I went as a private, got out as a private. I was constantly drinking and partying there. Yeah, it's every trouble I've ever had in my life. I've totaled out 3 cars every time because I was drinking. One of them was pretty serious. All right, should be dead now. None of this would have happened to me then. No, I had a quite serious car accident about 4 years ago. I lost a wife, and my first wife and I were divorced, and while I didn't realize it then, now I recognize that as being a result of my immaturity and my lack of responsibility, and that's all tied into my drinking.
In talking, it becomes obvious that a large percentage of the people in the penitentiary are here to some degree as a result of alcohol and drug
I don't know what
problems.
the statistics are, but I'm sure a vast majority,
Well,
yes.
it's estimated from 50 to 75, 80%, which is a very large factor here, Dave. And with your experience personally, with what you've gone through and with your professional experience, what do you think society is going to have to do to slow that down? Because it's going to increase, it looks like, if something isn't done. Do you have any ideas of what we can do?
I think first, education is certainly the most important part of it, and I hope what we're doing here today is lend some to that effort. I believe that no amount of incarceration, you know, that's shutting the barn, and you know, after the horse is gone in many respects. I think that the program, the pitfall program that they used to have in the pen, where a group of inmates would tour high schools and give talks and this kind of thing with an emphasis on the alcohol and drug elements, would be helpful. I think what we're doing here is helpful. I think an approach to educate in the schools is extremely important, and I'm not talking about the old scare tactics that they had when I was there, because that was absolutely of no value in my opinion. I think that's really what you're doing. I've noticed in the last, well, since I became aware of this in January, I've noticed more and more spots on television, articles in newspapers and in magazines, and I think that that makes sense. The more public awareness there is, the better results we'll see in the future.
The more results we'll see in the future. Well, of course, that's River Park's goal in bringing the It's Great to Be Alive series into your home. I'm happy to have been part of this television special dealing with South Dakota prisons, and invite you to join us again soon when River Park presents another in the People of Prison trilogy. And here's Glenn to tell you more about it.
Thank you, Dean, and thank you for helping River Park bring these social issues to public attention. As a South Dakota-based organization, River Park is deeply involved with any problem that affects the quality of life here. The well-being of the people of our state is our constant and deep concern. The renewed energy spent by law enforcement and courts to curb drunken driving is to be commended. Something has to be done to protect our people. We're not bleeding hearts on this subject. We realize that a person who breaks the law and endangers his own and others' lives must be dealt with. But this program and others to follow show clearly that realistically there have to be alternatives to simple incarceration. This will demand years of working on attitudinal changes for the general public. Prevention, education, rehabilitation. These factors seem to lead the way out from the dilemma our prisons find themselves in. And of course, the programs have to start at an early age. The younger, the better, if we're going to make any headway. In our next of the series, I'll be visiting with People of Prison, the women, and you'll see clearly how many of these young women were led to their present state by family alcoholism. In closing, I'd like to thank Warden Solon and staff for making the show possible, and the prisoners themselves for their cooperation. The men who allowed interviews have excellent attitude toward the future. Their problem was with alcohol, and while not approving of their actions, I have the deepest understanding of the events that led to their present state. I feel, as many of us should, that there, but for the grace of God, go I.